There's a guy I know named Greg. Greg is 54 years old, spent the last 11 years making extra principal payments on his mortgage every single month, skipped vacations, drove the same truck for 12 years, said no to his kids' private school requests, ate lunch at his desk. All of it funneled toward one goal, owning his house free and clear before retirement. Last March, Greg made his final payment. He sat at his kitchen table, held the payoff letter, and cried. 11 years of discipline, 11 years of sacrifice. The house was his. Greg has $47,000 in his retirement account. He is 11 years from retirement. The house is worth $380,000. Greg did not build security. Greg traded 11 years of compound growth for a piece of paper that says he owns the walls around him. And the walls cannot pay his grocery bill. I am not here to tell you that owning your home is bad. Home ownership is one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to regular people. What I am here to tell you is that there is a specific decision inside home ownership. The decision to aggressively pay down your mortgage ahead of schedule that feels like the most responsible financial move you can make while simultaneously being one of the most expensive. And the reason it feels responsible is because nobody ever shows you the opportunity cost. Nobody sits you down with a spreadsheet and says, here is what you are giving up on the other side of every extra dollar you send to the bank. My name is Tom. I spend an uncomfortable amount of time reading academic papers on household finance, Federal Reserve surveys on retirement readiness, and the kind of mortgage amortization research that does not make it onto mainstream financial television because it challenges a narrative that banks, real estate agents, and a certain strain of popular financial advice all benefit from keeping alive. If you own a home and have ever made an extra principal payment or are planning to, give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. By the end, you will understand the precise mathematical trade-off that Greg never made. The specific scenarios where early payoff actually does make sense, and the framework for deciding which side of this decision is right for your situation. Because this is not a simple answer, but it is a clear one once you see the math. Let me start with a story from 1720, not the John Law story you may have heard about the Mississippi Company, though that is a good one. Actually, a different one. Around the same era, across the English Channel, Dutch merchants had developed what was then the most sophisticated financial system in the world. Amsterdam was the global center of capital. The Dutch East India Company was the first publicly traded corporation, and Dutch homeowners, uniquely among Europeans at the time, had access to something called a long-term fixed-rate mortgage. Here is what the smart Dutch merchants figured out very quickly. If you can borrow money at 4% and deploy that same money into a business earning 12%, you do not pay off your loan early. You do not pay off your loan at all if you can help it. You keep the loan alive as long as possible and let the spread between the cost of borrowing and the return on investment do the compounding work. This is called leverage. And the Dutch used it to build the wealthiest trading empire in the 17th century world. The psychology of debt, the deep discomfort with owing money to anyone for any reason, is a cultural artifact that was useful in an era before reliable long-term investment vehicles existed. When the only alternative to paying off debt was burying coins in your yard, paying off debt was the right call. The coins in the yard earn nothing. The mortgage is costing you something. Pay it off. But that calculus changed completely once reliable, diversified, low-cost long-term investment vehicles existed. The moment you can consistently earn 7, 8, 9% annually in a boring index fund, and you are simultaneously paying 3, 4, 5% on a fixed-rate mortgage with the interest partially tax-deductible, the math does not point toward the mortgage. It points toward the market. And yet millions of Americans, including Greg, make the emotional choice and call it financial wisdom. Here's the core math I want you to understand. Think of your mortgage like a pipe. Money flows through that pipe in one direction, toward your equity. Every extra dollar you send through that pipe does one thing: it reduces your principal balance and eliminates future interest payments on that principal. It is a guaranteed return equal to your interest rate. If your mortgage rate is 4%, every extra dollar you pay down earns you a guaranteed 4% return. That is real. That is valuable. Guaranteed returns are rare. Now think about the stock market. The S&P 500 has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over the last century. Adjusted for inflation, roughly 7%. That is not guaranteed. There are years it goes down 30%. There are stretches like 2000 to 2012 where it goes basically nowhere. But over 20 and 30-year horizons, it has never delivered a negative return, not once in the recorded history of the American market. So here's the question you have to answer. If your mortgage rate is 4% and the expected long-term return on diversified equity investments is 7% after inflation, which pipe do you send the extra money down? The math says equity every time, over long enough horizons. But here is where people go wrong. They compare the guaranteed 4% return from mortgage paydown against the volatile 10% average from equities, and they get scared of the volatility. They would rather have the certain 4% than the uncertain 10%. That is a completely rational psychological response. Loss aversion is real. Uncertainty is genuinely uncomfortable. The problem is that over 20 and 30-year time horizons, the uncertainty of equities is not actually that uncertain. It is just uncomfortable to look at on a quarterly statement. Let me give you the numbers on what this costs in practice. Take a $300,000 mortgage at 4% interest with 20 years remaining. Your required monthly payment is approximately $1,818. You decide to pay an extra $500 a month toward principal. Over 20 years, that extra $500 a month accelerates your payoff by roughly 7 years. You save approximately $47,000 in interest. You own the house free and clear at year 13 instead of year 20. This feels like a tremendous win. Now run the other scenario. Instead of sending that extra $500 to the mortgage, you invested every month in an S&P 500 index fund, earning 7% annually after inflation. After 20 years, that investment account is worth approximately $261,000. After 13 years, the point at which the accelerated payoff person owns their home, it is worth approximately $117,000. So at year 13, you have two scenarios. Greg's scenario, house paid off, $0 in the investment account, $47,000 in interest savings. The alternative scenario, 7 more years of mortgage payments remaining, $117,000 in the investment account, still earning 7% a year. By year 20, when the standard mortgage would have ended anyway, the investor has $261,000 and the mortgage is now paid off on schedule. Greg, who paid it off early, has $0 in the investment account and a paid-off house. Both people own the house at year 20, but one of them also has $261,000 in a brokerage account. The interest savings from early payoff were $47,000. The opportunity cost of not investing was $261,000 minus $47,000 equals $214,000 of net wealth destroyed. Greg gave up $214,000 of real wealth to eliminate a 4% debt. That is the invisible price tag on the payoff letter he held while crying at the kitchen table. Now, I want to be fair here because this math has assumptions, and the assumptions matter. The 7% return is not guaranteed in any given 13-year period. If markets perform poorly, the investment account might be worth significantly less than $117,000 at year 13. The guaranteed 4% from mortgage paydown might outperform a bad investment period. That is a real risk. And there are tax considerations I will address in a moment. The math is not as clean in practice as it is in a spreadsheet, but the long-term directional truth holds. Over horizons of 15 years or more, the probability that diversified equity investment outperforms a 4 or 5% mortgage rate is historically very high. The people who ran this exact trade invested instead of accelerating payoff on any 20-year rolling window since 1926 in the U.S. market came out ahead of the mortgage paydown strategy the overwhelming majority of the time. Here is the second invisible cost of aggressive mortgage paydown that nobody ever discusses. Liquidity. When you send an extra dollar to your mortgage, that dollar becomes equity. Equity is not cash. Equity is an illiquid asset locked inside a physical structure that you cannot access without either selling the house or borrowing against it. If you lose your job 8 years into an aggressive paydown schedule, You may have $120,000 in extra equity and $3,000 in your savings account. You cannot pay your electric bill with equity. You cannot buy groceries with equity. You cannot make your mortgage payment, ironically, with equity. This creates a situation financial advisors call being house rich and cash poor, which is exactly where Greg ended up. He has $380,000 in home equity and $47,000 in retirement savings at age 54. His house cannot generate income. His house cannot cover an unexpected medical bill. His house cannot fund the gap between his planned retirement date and whatever Social Security provides. It just sits there, appreciating at maybe 4% a year, completely illiquid, doing none of the things he needs money to do in his late 50s and 60s. Meanwhile, $261,000 in an index fund is completely liquid. It throws off dividends. It can be withdrawn in pieces. It compounds. It works for Greg while he sleeps. It can be converted to cash in 3 business days. It is the opposite of equity in every practical financial sense. Let me show you what this actually means in retirement income terms. Using the 4% withdrawal rule, $261,000 in an investment account generates about $10,440 per year in retirement income indefinitely. That is income. That is cash flow. That is the difference between Greg eating whatever he wants and Greg doing math in his head before ordering at a restaurant. His paid-off house, by contrast, generates zero income unless he reverse mortgages it or sells it and downsizes, both of which carry enormous transaction costs, emotional costs, and complexity. The house does have real value. It eliminates his housing expense, which is significant. No mortgage payment in retirement is a genuine financial benefit. I am not dismissing that, but eliminating a $1,818 monthly expense is not the same as having $261,000 in accessible capital. One is a cost you avoid. The other is a resource you can deploy. Now let me address the scenarios where early payoff actually does make sense, because there are legitimate cases and I want to be precise about them. If your mortgage rate is above 6%, the calculus shifts meaningfully. At 7% or higher, the guaranteed return from paydown starts to approach or exceed the expected real return from equities on a risk-adjusted basis. If you took out a mortgage in 2023 or later and your rate is 7.5%, making extra principal payments has a much stronger mathematical case than it did in the 3% rate environment of 2020 and 2021. The lower your mortgage rate, the weaker the case for early payoff. The higher your rate, and the stronger it becomes. Second exception, if you are within 5 to 7 years of retirement and you are in a position where eliminating the mortgage payment would meaningfully improve your retirement cash flow security, the psychological and practical benefit of no housing payment may outweigh the mathematical argument for continued investing. Sequence of returns risk is real. If you enter retirement with no mortgage payment, your required monthly income is dramatically lower, which means you can sustain longer market downturns without selling assets at the bottom. That is worth something real, even if it is hard to quantify precisely. Third exception, if you have significant anxiety about debt that impairs your financial decision-making, the psychological value of a paid-off home is real and should not be dismissed. If owning the house free and clear lets you sleep at night and stay invested in equities through market downturns because you feel secure in your housing, then the psychological benefit may produce better long-term outcomes than the mathematically superior strategy executed with constant anxiety. Personal finance is personal. But make this choice with open eyes, not because nobody ever showed you the alternative. Here is the action framework. Step 1. Calculate your actual mortgage rate, not the nominal rate, but the after-tax rate. If you itemize deductions and your mortgage interest is tax-deductible, the true cost of your mortgage is your rate multiplied by 1 minus your marginal tax rate. A 4% mortgage for someone in the 22% bracket costs them 3.12% after tax. That is a very cheap source of financing. So compare that after-tax cost to expected investment returns, not nominal mortgage rate versus nominal return. Step 2. Build your emergency fund first, always before any extra mortgage payments. The liquidity argument is not theoretical. Life delivers unexpected expenses with startling regularity, and the people who discovered their home equity is inaccessible during a cash crisis learn that lesson expensively. 3 to 6 months of expenses in accessible cash is not optional if you are making any kind of aggressive financial move, including mortgage acceleration. Step 3. Max your tax-advantaged accounts before making any extra mortgage payments. Your 401k contribution limit in 2025 is $23,500. Your IRA limit is $7,000. Your HSA limit, if you have a qualifying health plan, is $4,150 for individuals. Every dollar that goes into those accounts grows tax-deferred or tax-free. Every dollar that goes into extra mortgage principal saves you your mortgage rate and future interest. The tax advantage of maximizing retirement accounts almost always beats the return from mortgage paydown after you account for taxes. Do the math in your specific situation, but for most people, the priority order is employer match first, then high-yield emergency fund, then max tax-advantaged accounts, then consider extra mortgage payments if anything is left. Step 4. If you have excess cash beyond all of the above and your mortgage rate is below 5%, strongly consider taxable brokerage investing over accelerated paydown. The math favors it over long horizons. Yes, it requires sitting with volatility. But the wealth difference compounded over 15 and 20 years is not marginal. It is the difference between a comfortable retirement and Greg's situation. Step 5. If you are already deep into an aggressive paydown like Greg, you are not without options. A cash-out refinance on a paid-off home can actually extract equity and redeploy it into investment accounts, though this comes with closing costs and rate considerations that need careful modeling. Alternatively, the money you are sending to extra principal, once the mortgage is paid off, can be aggressively redirected to investment accounts in the final years before retirement. It is not ideal. It is not what should have happened at 43. But it is not nothing either. The best time to plant this tree was 15 years ago. The second best time is now. Here is the deeper psychological point I want you to sit with. The feeling of owning something free and clear, the visceral satisfaction of no debt, is one of the most powerful emotional states in personal finance. It is the reason Dave Ramsey built a media empire. It is the reason the phrase "own your home outright" carries such cultural weight. Debt feels like vulnerability. Ownership feels like security. These are not irrational emotions. They are deeply human. But security is not a feeling. Security is a number. Security is the size of your investment account relative to your expected expenses. Security is liquidity when you need it. Security is income that shows up whether or not you go to work. A paid-off house does not provide any of those things. It provides a roof and an elimination of a housing payment, thus both of which are genuinely valuable and insufficient. The Dutch merchants in 1720 understood something that most American homeowners in 2026 do not. Debt at a low rate in the presence of a higher returning asset is not a problem to be eliminated. It is a tool to be managed. The mortgage is not the enemy. The retirement account balance is the scoreboard. Greg optimized for eliminating a feeling of vulnerability and ended up genuinely vulnerable because the feeling and the reality pointed in opposite directions. There is a version of Greg who, in 2014, instead of sending $500 extra per month to his mortgage, opened a Roth IRA and a taxable brokerage account and automated $500 into an S&P 500 index fund every single month. That version of Greg today has roughly $180,000 in investments instead of $47,000. His mortgage still has 5 years left, but his monthly payment is the same $1,818 it has always been. His house is still appreciating, and when the mortgage ends in 5 years, he will redirect that $1,818 per month into investments on top of what he is already contributing. By 65, he has a meaningful retirement account instead of a paid-off house and very little else. Both versions of Greg live in the same house. Only one of them has financial options. Go look at your mortgage statement tonight. Find your interest rate. Multiply it by 0.78 if you itemize deductions. That gives you the after-tax cost. Now compare that number to 7%. If the gap is 2% or more in favor of investing, you are looking at the price tag of early payoff. Make a deliberate decision with open eyes. Hit subscribe if this reframes something you thought you had figured out. Drop a comment and tell me where you land on this. Are you an aggressive paydown person? Are you an invest the difference person? I genuinely want to know. And if you know a Greg, send this to him. It is probably not too late. It is just a different math problem than he thought he was solving.